Hey everybody, I got a very polite, very congenial comment to a video that I put up, I don't know, a while back, probably years back. And the video had sort of an abrasive, sort of challenging title. I think it was Smells Like Doomer Brain Rot. And I have not rewatched the video. Um, Mostly because I've already worked out what I plan to say, and I don't want the content or particularly the tone of that video to color this one, because the person who left the comment was very, as I say, polite, congenial. So I'm going to respond in that vein. I've actually done something I rarely do, which I've made notes. I have an outline. Oh, by the way, this is my new Remarkable 2 tablet. I'll do a video about that pretty soon. I want to use it some more before I say anything about it. And I don't have this person's question up at the ready to read to you, but it was something to the effect of, hey, I think I probably match your definition of a doomer. Why do you no longer think that collapse is likely? Why wouldn't our society collapse by, say, 2040? Then he asks, you say you were part of the peak oil community, and he puts peak oil community in quotes. No, there really was a peak oil community, and it called itself as, just that. They had regular meetings. Why aren't you in it anymore? Is there a video? Well, there's actually a series of videos, but kind of like the Smells Like Doomer Brain Rot video, this is a series called Peak Oil Bullshit, parts 1 through 5, I think. So again, it's kind of abrasive, and I can't really complain if the comments that I get back from those videos are insulting. So I'm going to choose a milder title for this one, and I'm not looking to appeal to the algorithm. I'm going to post a link to this video that this person can find. So I'm not appealing. I'm not looking to bring in an audience with this one. This is largely for an audience of one, plus the people who watch all these videos, regardless of what I call them. The four things I want to cover are: 1, failed predictions of doom; 2, personal opportunity costs; 3, limited utility of guessing correctly; and 4, the psychological aspect became clear to me. So 1, failed predictions of doom. I started the Sea Realm podcast in 2006. At the time, I was very much a techno-utopian, a singularitarian. I thought we were coming up on an inflection point that was just going to transform the world dramatically for the better, powered by artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, genetic engineering, and all that good stuff. That didn't happen. You techno-utopians out there are saying hasn't happened yet. And yeah, the doomers are saying, yeah, collapse hasn't happened yet. But 2006, that was 16 years ago. And anyway, at the time, the techno-utopians wouldn't answer my email, so I couldn't really record interviews with them. The people who did answer my emails tended to be the doomers. And it was Dmitry Orlov's PowerPoint presentation. I didn't even hear him say it. I just read his slides. It was closing the collapse gap. And I wrote to him, and he agreed to be on the podcast, and that, kind of set things in motion. Interviews with Dmitry led to interviews with Jim Kunstler and Albert Bates and, what's his name? Albert Bartlett. It just kind of picked up speed, and I was on a first name basis with a lot of the major figures in the peak oil or collapse community. Other people like John Michael Greer, who is kind of an exception to this, because as far back as 2009, when I first talked to him, I think it was 2009, he had written a book called Apocalypse Not, saying, look, this peak oil stuff is real. The civilization is going to revert to a lower level of complexity and social organization, but it's not going to be a sudden event. This is a process that unfolds over a century or so, which is not very exciting, not very sexy. I mean, if somebody tells you that, global industrial society and the lifestyle that it sustains isn't sustainable over a course of hundreds of years, are you likely to change anything about your life? Maybe, but most people won't. Maybe you will, but most people won't. Anyway, failed predictions of doom. When I got into it, the thing that I found really compelling was the peak oil people were, they had graphs. they had data. They could say, look, Conventional oil production peaked in 2005. We are on the downhill slope. And, the rejoinder to that is, well, slick water hydrofracturing from long laterals, aka fracturing, fracking. This is going to free up new sources of hydrocarbon energy. And the peak oil community response was, one, it's too technologically intensive. Um, the wells deplete very quickly. There's just too much technological infrastructure and capital that has to go into starting these wells that they're just not economically viable. Well, here we are 16 years later, and the hydrocarbons are still flowing out of the ground. Somehow capital materializes. My position has been for a long time, and really, I think maybe even before I decided that I wasn't a doomer anymore, that energy production is kind of like the military. It doesn't have to turn a profit. It's required for this civilization. The government will subsidize it as necessary, and if absolutely necessary, just nationalize it. Just take over the production of hydrocarbon energy, because if that goes away, the government goes away. The power of the government, the prestige of the government goes away. They're going to do what they need to do to preserve their power and their prestige, and that means keep the hydrocarbons flowing. But back in 2007 really is when I first, I think, spoke to Dmitry Orlov. And I was really like 2008, 2009, 2010 when I was really a hardcore doomer. And I thought, man, this thing is coming down. As George W. Bush said, this sucker could come down, but it didn't. And like back around that time, I remember taking hot showers and savoring them, thinking, I might not have access to this in the near future. I thought the electric grid was going to collapse. The lights would go off and not come back on. I thought the internet would be, flickering out pretty soon. I thought that, cars on the road, the availability of gasoline, that was going to go away. And it didn't. And how long am I expected to sit, with this expectation of an impending collapse that never comes? Eventually my attention turned elsewhere. I got interested in other things. Personal opportunity costs. So I was in my mid-30s when I started the podcast, and when I got into the peak oil, and I adopted this notion or this expectation that the civilization that I grew up in and that I was operating in as an adult, that was, the functionality of it was short-lived and would be going away soon. And so I wasn't particularly scrupulous about paying my debts, filing taxes. Basically, all the things that adults are supposed to take seriously, I stopped taking seriously. Also, the doom mindset. I was married and I had kids, and my wife was not on board with it. And it definitely contributed heavily to the dissolution of my marriage, which meant that for the past 13 years, I've been paying child support. My kids grew up under another man's roof. She has since divorced that guy too. But anyway, I didn't get to have basically the life with my kids that I intended. And this largely comes from my obsession with doom, and I used doom as a crutch, for not taking things seriously that I didn't want to take seriously. It was an excuse. That's how I see it in hindsight. That's not how I saw it at the time. But anyway, that gets into the psychological. We'll come back to that. Personal opportunity costs. If I had stayed with my techno-optimistic viewpoint, I might have been investing in tech companies, which have, returned investments, the return on investments in things like Apple, Amazon, NVIDIA, Microsoft, Facebook, Netflix. I mean, if I had been investing in these things, according to my previous optimistic viewpoint, I would have done quite well. And particularly Bitcoin, good God. I was aware of Bitcoin when it was trading for less than $1. I remember somebody sent me 5 Bitcoin, and I looked at how much they were worth, and it just wasn't enough at the time for me to even bother creating a wallet to put them in. So those 5 Bitcoin, that transaction reversed, and eventually I assumed it reversed, and that person got their money back. Even now, with Bitcoin languishing at less than half of its all-time high, around $20,000, That's still $100,000. That was, at the time, it wasn't valuable enough for me to even bother with. Anyway, let's move on to the limited utility of guessing correctly. What if you're right? What if, in spite of, the track record, industrial civilization does fall apart tomorrow? What do you get for being right about it? You're not likely. I mean, if you are new to this mindset, you probably haven't quit your job and sold everything and moved to the country and purchased your doomstead and then acquired all the necessary tools and skills and social relationships that you're going to need to weather the collapse in style out in the country. You probably haven't done that. And if you think you have, I assure you, your preparations are inadequate. The things that are going to be valuable, if the internet goes away, if electricity goes away, if the transportation, the mobility that fossil fuel infrastructure provides to us, if all that goes away, the things that are going to be most valuable to you are going to be your social connections, the social cohesion of your local community. These are the things that you want to be embedded in, and this will be your life support structure. If you have some esoteric notion as to why the collapse happened, because you'd been following it, and maybe it's not peak oil, maybe it's something financial, maybe it's whatever. I'm not going to belittle it by pulling out really absurd things, but suppose that doesn't match the group agreement as to why the collapse happened. What is your sophisticated understanding that doesn't match the understanding of the people that you now depend on for your survival? How does that help you? To me, it seems like it could only be a hindrance. It's not going to allow you to restart civilization. you know so what do you get? What do you get for being right? The thing is, if you are right about collapse and it happens, you don't get much of anything. But if you're right about the collapse not happening and you plan your life and you act as if there is a future to inhabit, in technological civilization, you'll have a better place in it. Here I am in this lovely rustic environment, but I didn't necessarily. I did choose to be here, even proximately. I chose to be here, but way back when, this wasn't the life that I envisioned for myself. Okay, now the psychological aspect. When I was super into peak oil collapse, I remember going to a conference in Michigan, and some of the other guests there were like Nicole Foss and Guy McPherson. Heck, I was on stage. And at the time, Guy McPherson in particular, he was really into peak oil and saying this is going to cause the collapse. Then when it didn't happen and the peak oil community kind of dissolved around 2012, I think 2011 was the last ASPO conference that actually took place in New York. When, that whole community just sort of split apart and went their separate ways, Guy McPherson gravitated to climate change as the thing that's going to bring civilization down in short order. And now, he's saying total human extinction by 2050. If you go from one explanation for why the collapse is going to happen to another, to me, that says what you really need psychologically is the notion of the collapse. And you don't really care what the underlying explanation for it is. Whatever is handy, whatever is convincing will do. And, if you research this guy, you can get into some of the bad behavior that he is accused of. And, those accusations came to me via private channels before they were public. So, I'm not detailing them here and dwelling on it, but he had a strong psychological need because it gave him power over other people, to get them convinced that their familiar, reliable context in which they lived was soon going to be going away. This leaves them vulnerable, psychologically shattered. And, he got himself certified as a grief counselor so that he can swoop in and be their new rock. he was part of a trio. Well, I won't get into that. Anyway, looking back on it, I could see that I was gravitating to collapse largely because I was very dissatisfied with my place, my outcome in industrial society. And I think most of the people who gravitate to collapse have some gripe. They have some serious dissatisfaction with industrial society. Either, they think it's aggressively harmful to the planet, which it's not, but what they mean is that it's aggressively harmful to the biosphere, which arguably, there's a case to be made for that. There is no case to be made that it's, harmful to the planet. Or they have some social gripe. And, gripe is a negatively inflected word. They have some dissatisfaction, some profound dissatisfaction with the unfairness of society, or with the shallowness of society, or where it's gone, or how technology has de-skilled us and made us soft and helpless and dependent upon, the technological infrastructure. They have some underlying complaint, which even though they may not admit it, and they may say, the opposite. I hope I'm wrong. I hope the civilization doesn't collapse. But deep down, maybe even not that deep down, maybe just under the surface, there is that active hope that, yes, this wicked society is going to get what's coming to it soon. I'm going to get to see it. Maybe you will. But again, what do you get for being right about that? Better to plan to be a part of a successful, thriving industrial, technological society than to plan to be a witness to its demise. Because, if it doesn't fall, you're left there with very little to show for your commitment, your investment in visions of doom. So he asks, so this is all, kind of me recounting why I became disillusioned with this doomer mindset. But I think, the person who asked me the question is asking, why now? What are my explanations now for dismissing whatever the current crop of, predictions of doom are? And I would just say, I'm not even going to go and reverse myself in the newest iteration of the predictions of doom, because for just about any of them, they're all perennial, whether it's financial. I mean, the internet is not really an archive of past sentiments the way it's presented as being. It, things that aren't actively supported, they do fade. Like my whole podcast archive is not available anymore. I had to remove it just for financial reasons because it's expensive to host those files. But then, my computers, they get old, they get replaced, and those files, I mean, they all exist somewhere. In fact, somebody sent me the whole archive a few years ago so that I could put it back up, and I gave it to somebody to put it back up, and they didn't finish the task, and I no longer have the thing that was sent to me. The point being, it's kind of hard to find proof of it now unless you're really adept at using the Internet Archive, in the Wayback Machine, which is not a complete record of, the Internet as it was, but death of the dollar. I mean, if we had a really exacting record of what people were saying in 2005, 2002, 1996, I mean, the internet goes back that far, but the web doesn't. I mean, even the web does. The web's from like 94, but most people weren't using it. But people have been generating fear with the prospect of an economic collapse forever, to sell gold or to sell weapons or real estate in the country or whatever. The idea that catastrophe is coming and you have to prepare has been a sales pitch which people have been perfecting for decades, probably for centuries. So whatever you've gravitated to now, it's not new. You may have discovered it newly. You may be new to it, but it's not new. People have been saying collapse is imminent because of whatever it is, that has convinced you that collapse is imminent for a very long time, and it hasn't happened. And I'm telling you, it's not going to happen. Not the way you're expecting, and not on the timeline that you're expecting. Will bad stuff happen in the future? Absolutely. our history is a history of bad stuff. Think about the Great Depression. People actually starving. Do you know anybody who's actually starving? Supposedly the 2008 financial crisis to the present has represented an economic contraction and, in dollar terms, a hardship greater than the Great Depression. But, our technological circumstances are different. Food is produced in mass, mechanically, at a much greater scale with much greater efficiency than was the case back then. So, you might not legally own your house like you used to, but you're still more concerned with losing weight than you are with not dying, from starvation. Think of World War II. Think of Europe at the end of World War II. It was fucking flattened. I mean, it was. Do you think you are ever going to encounter an apocalyptic event like World War II in Europe or Japan? But those societies, reorganized, rebuilt, regenerated, and were better than they were before in short order. So could some catastrophe befall us? Yeah. you know, Psychologically, it's probably good to be prepared to endure that, but it's not the end of the world. In fact, somebody who wants the end of technological civilization, Theodore Kaczynski, he wrote a book for people who are hoping for that and who want to work toward helping make it happen. And the thing that he warns about is that after the collapse, you're still going to have a bunch of living engineers who went to school, who know how stuff works, and there's going to be an immediate push to put things back together, and they will succeed unless you stop them. you know? So, John Michael Greer's notion of catabolic collapse, a stair-step collapse process where there's a collapse and then a partial recovery, and another collapse and then a partial recovery. And the partial recoveries are so rapid and so good, so skillful, that during that time it looks like, the event, which was one step in this stair-step collapse, was really just a hiccup, and now we're back to infinite growth. So anyway, why do you think collapse is going to come by 2040? What's the magic of the 2040 date? Because, I spent a fair amount of time looking forward to 2012 as, not the collapse, but as the concrescence, a sort of not necessarily strictly technological singularity, but a sort of technological, social, psychic, pan-dimensional, flourishing that was going to transform the world in 2012. 2013 looks a lot like 2011, in the rearview mirror. Now, a lot of really important stuff happened in the realm of AI in 2012, but its importance is just, I won't say it's just now becoming clear, but the implementation of the new discoveries and new developments from 2012 are still in the process of revealing themselves, and they're really accelerating in this moment. Maybe AI as an existential threat. I mean, if you're really looking for something to fret over, there's a lot of good material there. Now, peak oil people don't like that because, if I were to travel back in time from the year 2022 to say the year 2013 or 2011, we'll say 2011. Suppose I got to go to the ASPO, the last ASPO conference, Association of Peak Oil and Gas, that took place in Washington, D.C. every couple of years for a long time, and, which ended in 2011. I was at that one. If I could go back and tell those people what 2022 is like, they would be, well, they'd be incredulous because time travel is impossible. But, if I could demonstrate that I was back from the future, they would be pissed off. The electrical grid is still working. The internet is still working. People are still driving around in cars. You can still buy gas at the gas station. That's not what we were promised. We were promised a world made by hand. We were promised a return to a lower technological level and a civilizational level. Kathy McMahon, the peak shrink. Oh, wow, I'm nearly half an hour here. This will be the last thing I say. Kathy McMahon, the peak shrink, who has, withdrawn that public persona, said that she used to get communication from people, men, who were angry at feminism, and they were looking forward to peak oil because it is only this technological civilization which basically diminishes the importance of physical strength and the physical capabilities, the difference in capabilities between men and women, that has elevated women to a point where, I've had multiple women bosses in corporate structures, and what misery, what freaking misery. And I can well imagine somebody in that situation pining for peak oil because it's going to be a return to masculine rule. And it would be. It absolutely would be. And this guy, I think, was, you know, either unconscious of how honest he was being about his actual motivations, or he was just that invested that he was willing to say it. Just fuck feminism and fuck women being in charge. I'm looking forward to the collapse so that we can get back to how it's supposed to be, with men in charge. I think very few people are as connected with their actual motivation for pining for collapse as that guy was. I think a lot of us dress it up. I dressed it up, and maybe I'm projecting onto other people. But anyway, I got tired of waiting for the collapse. I imagine, I don't know how old you are, I don't know how long you've been a doomer, but I got tired of waiting for it. I spent the time from my mid-30s to now I'm in my mid-50s, but I've been out of it for like 5 years. So a solid 15 years of my life really wasted on that garbage. And I would encourage you to treat it as a seductive potential addiction. And if it's already got its hooks in you, then just think of it as an addiction and do what you need to expel that demon, because it's doing you no good, in my opinion. Your mileage may vary. Thank you for being polite. Not everybody who pushes back against my video pronouncements is so polite. Take care.